Welcome to the road to independence. In this program, we'll journey back to a time when the idea of an independent America was just a spark. What led to the cry for freedom? What happened at Lexington and Concord? Why did a group of men decide to sign the Declaration of Independence, knowing they could be hanged for treason? Before the Revolution, there was peace. The 13 British colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast of North America from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south. By the 1750s, these colonies were growing fast. Farmers tilled the land, merchants traded goods, and local governments handled most daily affairs. Life was, for the most part, stable. But beneath the surface, things were beginning to shift. After the 7 Years' War, popularly called the French and Indian War in America, Britain was deep in debt. To pay it off, Parliament looked to the colonies. After all, hadn't Britain spent money protecting them from the French? Surely the colonists should help pay. So in 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. This law required colonists to buy special stamped paper for newspapers, licenses, legal documents, and more. For many colonists, this was outrageous. Why? Because they had no representatives in Parliament. They argued, "No taxation without representation." Protests erupted across the colonies. Effigies of tax collectors were burned in the streets. Mobs surrounded officials' homes. Under intense pressure, the Stamp Act was repealed, but the damage was done. Britain soon tried again. The Townshend Acts of 1767 placed new taxes on glass, paper, paint, and tea. Colonists boycotted British goods. Tensions were rising and fast. Things came to a boiling point in Boston, a city known for its fierce independence. On March 5, 1770, a confrontation turned deadly. A crowd of colonists gathered near the customs house, taunting British soldiers and throwing snowballs, rocks, and insults. Suddenly shots rang out. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists lay dead. This became known as the Boston Massacre. Patriot leaders like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere used the event to stir public anger. Revere even engraved a dramatic, somewhat exaggerated image of the massacre showing redcoats firing into a helpless crowd. Although tensions eased slightly after Parliament repealed some taxes, one remained: the tax on tea. Then came the tipping point, the Tea Act of 1773. It allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies cheaper than before. But the colonists saw it as a trick to make them accept British control. They refused. On December 16, 1773, something extraordinary happened. A group of men, many disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships in Boston Harbor. They opened 342 chests of tea and dumped them into the cold, dark water. This bold protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. King George III and the British government were furious. In response, they passed what the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. These harsh laws shut down Boston's port, placed Massachusetts under direct royal control, and allowed British soldiers to be housed in colonists' homes. Colonists across America saw this as a threat to all of their freedoms. In the fall of 1774, representatives from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia to form the First Continental Congress. They weren't calling for independence yet, but they did agree to boycott British goods and urged each colony to prepare militias in case of conflict. Still, many hoped for peace. Could compromise be found? Could they fix the relationship with Britain? Unfortunately, time was running out. On the night of April 18, 1775, British General Thomas Gage sent 700 troops marching from Boston toward Concord. Their mission? To seize colonial weapons and arrest John Hancock and Samuel Adams, 2 key Patriot leaders. But the colonists were ready. Patriot writers Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Dr. Samuel Prescott rode through the countryside shouting, "The British are coming!" Their midnight ride alerted the Minutemen local militia, who could be ready to fight at a minute's notice. At dawn on April 19th, British troops reached the town of Lexington. About 70 Minutemen stood waiting. A tense silence fell. Suddenly a shot rang out. No one knows who fired first. But within seconds, the British opened fire. killing 8 colonists and wounding others. The Redcoats then marched to Concord, but the weapons had already been moved. At North Bridge, hundreds of armed colonists met them. A fierce firefight broke out. The British were forced to retreat, and as they marched back to Boston, hundreds of angry militia ambushed them from behind trees, stone walls, and barns. By the end of the day, nearly 300 British soldiers were dead, wounded, or missing. The American Revolution had begun. Just 3 weeks later, the Second Continental Congress met again in Philadelphia. This time, the mood was different. War was no longer a distant possibility, it was reality. The delegates voted to create the Continental Army and chose George Washington of Virginia as its commander. Tall, dignified, and experienced, Washington would lead the colonists in the fight for freedom. Meanwhile, the fighting continued. In June 1775, colonial forces dug in on Breed's Hill, just outside Boston. British troops attacked in waves. The Americans held their ground until they ran out of gunpowder. Though the British captured the hill, they suffered over 1,000 casualties. The battle known as Bunker Hill proved the colonists could stand up to the world's most powerful army. Even now, many still hoped for peace. The Congress sent a final petition to King George III, the Olive Branch Petition, pleading for reconciliation. The king refused. Instead, he declared the colonies in open rebellion. The idea of independence was spreading like wildfire. In January 1776, a powerful pamphlet appeared, written by a man named Thomas Paine. It was called Common Sense. Paine argued it was not only logical but necessary for the colonies to break away. He wrote in plain language so all could understand. He said, "Why should a tiny island rule a vast continent? The cause of America is the cause of all mankind." Common Sense was a sensation. It sold more than 100,000 copies in just a few months. For many, it was the moment their minds shifted from protest to revolution. The colonies began to discuss something once unthinkable: declaring independence. In June 1776, the Continental Congress decided to act. They formed a committee of 5 to write a declaration. Among them were John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and a young Virginian named Thomas Jefferson, just 33 years old. Jefferson was chosen to write the draft. In a small room, lit by candlelight, he wrote one of the most important documents in history. On July 2nd, Congress voted in favor of independence. 2 days later, on July 4th, 1776, they adopted the Declaration of Independence. Its words were bold, revolutionary, and inspiring. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Jefferson listed the many wrongs committed by King George III. He argued that governments must protect the people's rights, and if they don't, the people have the right to change or abolish them. With this declaration, the United States of America was born. But freedom would not come easily. The war dragged on for 7 more years. There were defeats and hardships at Valley Forge, soldiers froze and starved. But there were victories in Trenton, Saratoga, and finally Yorktown in 1781, where British General Cornwallis surrendered. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially ended the war. The American colonies had done the impossible. They had defeated a mighty empire and created a new nation based not on monarchy, but on liberty, equality, and democracy. And it all began with brave people who dared to believe in something greater. They believed in the power of self-government, in the value of freedom, and in the truth that all people are created equal. To the road to independence. From the streets of Boston to the fields of Concord, from the writings of Thomas Paine to the signing of the Declaration, this is the story of how a nation was born. A nation that continues to strive, debate, and evolve, founded on revolutionary ideals that still echo today. Freedom, justice, independence. If you'd like to learn more, subscribe to the channel to get more history like this.